It is a pleasure to welcome you to an interview with someone who's one of my favorite people, the way he thinks, the way his mind works, love it. Nick Thompson has quite the career, actually. I met him 10 years ago when he was a senior editor for Wired. We met at an interview at CNN where we were about to go online predicting the world in 2020. That was a decade ago, and I totally lost track of the fact that now it is 2020. So I rewatched that video, tried auditing it a bit. Nick, any thoughts on your reactions to 11 years ago, Nick and Jeremy?
I was pretty impressed. We got a lot of stuff right. We talked augmented reality is going to be big. We're going to start seeing the inklings of brain-machine interfaces, Internet of Things, emotion sensing wearables.
We talked about tablets. I also
we overestimated the tablet. I mean, the tablet is great, but I kind of described it as like the greatest thing that would ever happen.
We also talked about the paperless office, and it made me think, like, who's even talking about obviously people are printing stuff, but it seemed like in 2009 that was actually a topic.
Yep, paperless office, that's funny, that's true.
So
we talked about that. Yeah.
And then after that, you became contributing editor at Bloomberg, at CNN, and then editor of The New Yorker. I always love all those New Yorker covers. And it seems like you've got a thing for covers from every possible magazine out there. I know you're not editor-in-chief of Wired, but I see you consistently sharing the covers that you find pointed, whether they're from a competitor or not.
Yeah, no, I love covers. You know, I was the editor of NewYorker.com doing the website, so I wasn't actually choosing the covers, but I have noticed how viral they went on social media. And, you know, a really good cover is just a beautiful way to make a statement about the world as it is right now and what your magazine stands for. And so even as print goes away and as newsstand sales go to zero, covers still have this cultural cachet. And I love that, so I share them all the time.
Awesome. All right, well, I think that we are ready to rock and roll. I see we've got about 1,000 people signed up today, which is exciting. If you're listening to this, you are on the lovely invite list from all people that are actually going to be, in all likelihood, at our Future Festival World Summit in a week. So actually, just so we can see the excitement, if you want to just start putting in some of your comments into the chat, maybe let us know where you're dialing in from so that we know we're not just talking to an empty box. Let's double check. Yep, okay, Portugal, Indiana, Boston. All right, there we go. It's alive. This makes it, I gotta tell you.
This is great.
I do a lot of keynote speaking, as does Nick. And now that we're in a virtual world, it feels so weird because you're talking to a box, but trying to maintain all the enthusiasm and just seeing a little bit of life in there. That's what makes it exciting. Okay, so we got a couple questions submitted to us in advance, and then we've got a couple that are top of mind. But as the editor-in-chief of Wired magazine, as a guy who's so exposed to so many different angles of media, you see a lot, you think about a lot, and I wanted to just open up with something very simple. Hopefully we're not in a COVID crisis mode forever. So let's imagine a world where we emerge a little bit. What happens next year? Just vaguely, what does 2021 look like?
What does 2021 look like? Okay, I think we are going to have a vaccine. I think it's going to be less effective than we hope, but still quite effective. I think there's going to be a huge debate over how you roll it out. And there are all kinds of different models. The ones that are most politically acceptable aren't the most efficient. The ones that are most efficient are not the most politically acceptable. So we'll roll out the vaccine in some combination of acceptability and efficiency. And by next summer, next fall, we're getting back to normal. So then what does that mean? It actually means we're in a pretty good spot because there'll be so many things we've learned from this horrible period of lockdown, right? We'll have learned how to do remote work. We'll have learned how to do telemedicine. We'll have learned how to be educated online. We'll have taken sort of 10 years of innovation that we packed into a year and a half. We're allowed to actually go outside and have our friends over for dinner again. The world will be a decent place again. So I'm reasonably optimistic that once we get through this hell, we'll be okay.
Now, I have a thought on this that I'd love to get your reaction to, but I feel like right now there's, some companies that are doing better, some that are about the same, a lot that are worse, but everyone's kind of hustling in the background. And I know with the trend research that we're doing, I think we've done 2,000 trend reports during COVID of people that it seems like are looking at other industries. So when I see like Amazon going into groceries, well, no one expected that. Well, a month ago, Amazon launched luxury stores. No one expected that. Do you think that we're going to get a whole bunch more surprises popping out of big brands crossing the line into other industries, people's R&D that's been happening for a year that suddenly starts, announcing itself as a new product or service?
Yeah, totally. I think the next year will be crazy for innovation. You'll have all kinds of surprises where, people will see market opportunities because everything has changed. Everything has been thrown up in the air. Everything is different. And some companies will make really smart bets about really weird things to do. And other companies will make really bad bets about weird things to do. But the next year will not be boring in the slightest.
There's a live question that just came in from Darlene McLeod. She's asking about what about trends in education? What do you think about that? I know there's a variety of new platforms that have been experimented, Seesaw, even just Zoom. Does some of this sustain, or what's going to happen there?
Yeah, some of it sustains. I was having a conversation with my kids, and winter is starting here in New York, and we're realizing there's probably never going to be a snow day again, right? Like there will be days where there's 2 feet of snow, but the school will just say, all right, it's Zoom time.
Oh no.
They were pretty bummed out. Like, well, when are we going to go sledding? Well, you still have weekends, and like if it's really bad, we can play hooky, right? We figure it out. But it's a realization that schools, the infrastructure for doing remote learning has expanded in ways you never could have imagined. So I think when this is over, there'll be some kind of a hybrid model. The thing that I haven't seen as much improvement in that I would have expected improvement in is AI-based learning systems that really adapt to the kids, right? My kids use lots of different apps. They learning languages, learning math, learning how to do mazes, all these things. And I haven't seen stuff that's kind of brilliantly adaptive to their own specific skills. And you would have imagined that with so many people going online and so much new data being generated, you would have that. Maybe it exists. I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, I feel like what happened was an immediate gravitation towards the incumbents in e-learning. And in my personal opinion, there wasn't a huge amount of progress. That was not a fully exploited space already. But now there's got to be a lot more people that are eyeing it. Do you think that we'll have a couple surprises that happen from someone like, maybe one of the big tech firms that right now is getting ready to launch something that would be better for education?
Maybe, right? I mean, it's interesting, right? When you think about video conferencing, right? Like Zoom did conference, right? It beat Microsoft, it beat Google, like sort of shocking. Will you have new upstarts in education? It's just a harder market. It's kind of a less free market, which makes it harder for an upstart to come. You need relationships with school systems. It's a pretty complicated market. I was really proud of my 12-year-old. He wrote a outraged letter to his school last week, complaining that his Chromebook wouldn't allow him to use DuckDuckGo because it's locked into a contract with Google, and that DuckDuckGo actually protects your privacy. And as a child, actually the school should be in favor of it. So that was pretty neat, but I don't know whether we're going to see a massive shift. Though it is true that Seesaw started relatively slowly and then boomed the last 3 to 6 months, if I understand it right.
Now, I've got a COVID puppy. That's my COVID gift, I suppose, born March 12th. And so I walk him on this little route in my neighborhood, Bloor West Village, and it should be a hustling, bustling part of Toronto. In one of your trips here, I bet you at some point, whether you knew or not, you probably were in Bloor West Village. But when I walk my dog on the route that would normally be full of life and excitement, a route full of the mom and pop shops and restaurants, in a 0.7 mile journey, there are now 27 storefronts that are for lease. The little shop's gone. Yeah. And that's the heartbreaking thing that you don't even notice because you're not really spending time just perusing shops the way you did before. What do you think fills those storefronts? Because I think there'll be support from it. I'll feel bad about whatever had to go. I'll want to support it. But what fills it?
I mean, the problem is that, eventually the rents will go down, the market will adjust, people will have more money. At some point, as the economy picks up, depressed rents and more money and people will want to move in. But of course, the other problem is that we now do everything online and we'll have learned that, right? So we order everything from Amazon, including categories of stuff we didn't order from, pre-pandemic. So it will probably just accelerate so that it's all experiential stores, right? Every single one of those 27 stores will either be a cardio fitness place, a nail salon, or a restaurant.
I think they're all nail salons already, actually, but okay.
I don't know how a city can support as many nail salons as it seems like every major city now supports, like literally 1 of every 4 stores in Brooklyn is a nail salon.
Yeah, I tried doing the math on it. I don't understand.
Doesn't make sense.
What do you think would be the thing, other than the election? Let's get to the election after. What do you think you would be most worried about and most excited about for 2021?
Well, I mean, the thing to worry about is that, the vaccine doesn't work, immunity doesn't last, and we just go through and people become restless and impatient. And so lockdowns no longer work. And we just go through what we're going through in the United States, where it's wave after wave, cycle after cycle, and we don't actually ever get to the other side. We don't actually do what they've done throughout most of Asia. That's what worries me the most. What excites me the most is, I think there's going to be some interesting innovations. Like it might be a year where driverless cars make a real advance because we actually want to be in driverless cars. It might be a year where robotics makes a huge advance because we're more willing to be near robots, right? There could be some incredible tech coming next year.
And anything else that you think would actually be the thing that worries you?
Anything else that worries me besides other than the lack of a vaccine and a bad response to COVID? I mean, in the United States, we have, it's political worries, right? Regardless of how the election turns out, regardless of who wins or who doesn't win, there's the big question of whether we actually trust the process of voting, right? In this democratic experiment, which has lasted, 200 years, more than 200 years, could it be threatened? It won't collapse. We're not going to move to authoritarianism in the next few years. But what worries me is people losing faith in this system, this, United States and Western democracy slowing down at the same time that China rises. And you see, as it comes to tech, you see the Chinese tech companies becoming ever more powerful throughout the world. And you see the American tech companies hamstrung, listless, and you see sort of the tech Cold War going more in the direction of China. That worries me.
So on our day 3 of Future Festival, we're going to do scenario planning workshop, and spoiler alert, we're going to look at 4 different worlds. There's 2 sort of uncertainties. Does the vaccine and COVID, does it work and go away or not? And does life change or does it not? Because there's a couple different worlds. So you could have a world where we are just, COVID stays with us and we just live with it. Mm-hmm. And in that world, I was watching videos on some of the robotics in China to sort of bring this back to you. And there are robot drones that go into every one of the streetcars and subway cars to clean them in between each passenger use. There are drones that fly in the downtowns that read everybody's temperature in order to see who would need to actually, be sequestered away. And then the robots that are sort of driven that go down the street that actually shoot out more of the sanitization. And, first of all, it looks a little dystopian to see a tank-like robot shooting out a gas going down the street, not gonna lie.
Yeah.
But also I look at that and I just think, wow, we are so far from imagining that in North America. And if this thing stays with us, wow, we are not in the right mind space for what China's doing.
No, and in China, restaurants where you go in and you'll place your order with the robot will bring you your food. You have a nice dinner with somebody you've, been, locked up with, and then, presto, totally different experience. So that you can imagine a world where the West, where we're continued to be in lockdown, where we're not innovating the way that China is, just that leading to a continued divergence of tech trends, which would not be great.
I think we end up in a digital Cold War with China.
I think we're heading into it. I mean, it's been my biggest concern the last couple of years, and every single thing that has happened in the last year has made it worse, right? The fighting over China's responsibility for the virus, the Chinese backlash in the United States throughout the West, the war against Huawei, the fight over TikTok, the banning of WeChat. Everything is leading to the world splitting into, half the world with the Chinese tech sphere, where China builds your 5G systems, you run Chinese apps on top of it, or you have Ericsson build your 5G systems and run Western software on top of it. We are heading very much in that direction. So could we get off of it? I don't see how, because regardless of how Tuesday turns out, Trump's definitely going to continue in that direction. And Biden actually seems, he's not quite as strident as Trump. He's more thoughtful, of course, but he is also quite anti-China. So who knows? But I'm worried, regardless of the outcome on Tuesday, that it gets worse.
Now, one thing I always thought was sort of interesting, when you look at something like a WeChat, it is everything. It's the Facebook, the Tinder, the payment system, and some users or some listeners today might not fully be aware, but in China, the default social app is everything from payment to schedules. If you're in Guangzhou, China, you can't actually buy food from a street vendor without WeChat. If you cross the street, you will, and you jaywalk, you get a fine that goes right to your WeChat, takes the money out immediately. And if you misbehave, it impacts your WeChat social rating. Like it's everything in a dystopian way. So when I then look at what's happening in the US with the tech backlash and worries or scares about splitting things apart, it's sort of interesting because I feel like you're in a different geopolitical world now, where if you decide to cut or chop up the US tech giants, you're also kind of setting yourself backwards and making yourself more ripe for disruption in a tech war against China. What are your thoughts on something like that?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So that gets at what I think is one of the hardest issues in tech right now. So it's the question of whether antitrust action, right? And there's a ton of antitrust action in the US. There's antitrust action led by the DOJ, FTC, by the House, by the state attorney generals, right? And all of that could lead to, breaking up the big tech companies. Now, will breaking up the big tech companies help or hurt in this Cold War? The big tech companies would have you think, well, it's going to be quite harmful, right? If you break up Facebook, how could we possibly compete with WeChat, right? If tech is a national security interest, right? If Facebook is the equivalent of Boeing in the last Cold War, how can you possibly think of breaking us up, right? And that is an argument Sheryl Sandberg and Mark Zuckerberg make all the time. And it's not without merit. It is absolutely true, right? It is valuable to the United States and to the West to have a huge percentage of the best artificial intelligence researchers working at this giant company with monopoly rents. On the other hand, counter argument would be, maybe if you broke these companies up, you'd have a little more competition. And if you had a little more competition, you'd have a little more innovation. Maybe there would be a social network in the United States that actually protected your privacy better than Facebook, because it outcompetes Facebook if you had a competitive market. So that is an argument that I can argue both ways for hours.
Yeah, I watched actually on your Facebook link. I couldn't believe I almost missed this excitement, but I saw the sharing of the 6-hour Senate hearing that had Apple, Google, Amazon, Microsoft. And it was 6 hours. I tried to explain it to other people, like, you would watch that for 6 hours? That sounds boring. It was really good because the hearing long ago of Zuckerberg versus, the Senate sounded like they were ill-informed. Like, what's the business revenue model? In this one, it was loaded with gotcha questions where you learned about terrible things done from each 4 of those companies that absolutely suppress innovation. And you can find this if you have 6 hours free. Just give it a whirl if you're slightly interested. But they range from Amazon allowing counterfeit products to be sold and not caring about it, and then with diapers.com becoming the competitor, willing to lose $200 million on diapers and then acquiring diapers.com. Sounds unfair. With Facebook using the actual emails from Zuckerberg and using what he talked about with Instagram and saying, do you know that's the definition of the anti-competitive competition, what you just did and said in your testimony? With Apple, it was the App Store, overcharging everyone, total monopoly, acting as censor to the world. And then with Google, it was that 60% of your own search results end up on a Google page. Like you can't actually get to the brand. And so Nick Thompson has to advertise on Nick Thompson. Wired has to pay for ads on Wired.
Yeah.
That's it, 4 different scenarios. What are your thoughts when you watched that and you heard some of those different things about those companies? Did you look at it thinking they're right, this needs to be stopped, or what do you feel?
I feel very conflicted because they are right. It does need to be stopped. But then you also watch the way our government works and you think, these clowns couldn't possibly do this correctly, right? It's like somebody misbehaves and you want to sanction them for their misbehavior, but the only person who can sanction only has a gun and doesn't know how to aim it, right? So it's not like, I don't feel good about any of the outcomes. I mean, my preferred outcome, I'm on public record saying this, is I would like there to be a strong, credible threat of antitrust action that is not carried out. I would like to rein in the tech companies' behavior because they're actually worried they might be broken up, but I don't want our incompetent partisan government to try to break them up.
That's a really good point. And maybe even that one day was a little bit of a threat. I mean, when you've got billionaires suddenly having the gotcha questions asked to them, you can bet that that impacts a little bit of behavior.
Except, so we had those hearings, which were really good, right? And those are the House hearings, and it was because the House had just commissioned, a 500-page report on antitrust, or was in the process of writing it. They knew their stuff. But then last week we had hearings on Section 230, which were much less informed and seemed, again, sort of chaotic, partisan, and occasionally stupid. So it was just a reminder that when the US government has a small group of committed people who are really focused on a problem, they can figure stuff out. When it's just sort of the General Senate and the General House, you get, it's not impressive.
Do we end up in a world where somehow we end up in an AI war, or does some of this lead us down a really bad path?
Yeah, well, okay, so AI war could be two things, right? So an AI war, you could imagine it as the United States and China competing over who has the most advanced artificial intelligence, and lots of IP theft, and the country that has the best AI not sharing it and leading it to huge economic booms, right? You can imagine that happening, and that's a slow process, and we're going in that direction. You can also imagine an AI war being something literal, where the United States and China go to war, and it's basically, the game theory of how we plan the attacks, and the planes we send out and the submarines we launch are all guided by AI. The strategy is guided by AI. You can actually, in the worst case scenario, imagine that the United States nuclear missile strategy is guided by AI. My feeling is that any war, more than 5 years in the future will be an AI war, and the rules of engagement, we gotta figure those out pretty soon.
I have a question here from a Daniel Cohen, and I kind of think it relates to this in a way. His question was, where is privacy going? Will consumers be able to control their data? But I'd almost want to tie it into this question to say, yeah, that question about our privacy, but also does some sort of AI war like that, does it become personal, or does it become threatening in a way that hits home in a different way?
That's interesting. So on where privacy is going, I think for the first time in the last 10 years, privacy is in equilibrium, where the powers of the large tech companies to extract ever more data about you without you knowing it is about equal to our knowledge and desire to stop it, right? In the past, the number of people who've cared about it has been very small. And so our privacy has just eroded. Now it's become large. Maybe it can sort of stay in stasis. It won't get worse, it won't get better. Will a war be personal? Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, this would be a little far off in the future, but where you can imagine that China has hacked the OPM, it has data on every American. You can imagine them figuring out particular traits of individual soldiers and individual battalions. I mean, it's pretty hard to fathom a future where diseases that are specific to individuals or to small groups of people are launched chemically, but I would imagine there's some smart people thinking about how to do that and how to prevent that.
I also wonder on privacy, just taking that even a leap further, there's been a couple things. There was the fappening when all of the Hollywood celebrities had their email accounts leaked, and then there were hundreds of them that had their personal photos leaked. But that made you just think, wow, someone got access to all of iCloud and got everything. Yeah. So if there's something that can access everything on you and me, what else could they do? Could you put an attack out on maybe I'm going down a dystopic path that we shouldn't
do it. Why not? It's trend hunter.
If there's a situation like that where something can be compromised, I mean, billions of emails have been hacked and released. So what happens if an AI war wasn't about the country versus the country? It was attacking every citizen and exposing their info.
Oh, right. What if what if a country that wanted to do harm to the United States actually just hacked Gmail and made every single person's email searchable, right? And allowed everybody to find out all the worst things about everybody else. That is an attack vector I have not thought about, but it would be brilliant for the attacking country, absolutely awful for everybody else. Your only hope of defense would be that there's just so much that it's hard to find the needles in the haystacks, and that your particular needles won't be found in that massive haystack. But I suppose the point of releasing everybody's email to everybody would be that anyone who had an interest in causing you harm could search through it. So that's the worst thing I've ever heard, Jeremy. Happy Monday.
I'll stop this because I got 10 more of them. When I do my Super Future keynote, I pose these like difficult ethical dilemma questions of the future into the crowd. I call them my creepy questions. And I ask, do you want the creepy ones or the strategic ones? And everyone always says creepy, but you're right.
That is an incredibly creepy question, right? If Gmail were ever completely hacked, right? And you have to imagine that there's enough encryption in enough places and enough, that it would actually be impossible to make Gmail entirely searchable, right? I don't think that like if you gave Sundar Pichai a week, I don't think he could search everybody's Gmail. Like there must be enough defensive mechanisms to wall it off in enough different ways. But you could probably get in the direction of being able to do that, and then you get real problems.
Now, what about digital clones?
Yes, what about them?
So it's interesting to watch deepfakes because that started in 2017, but I felt like it was always inaccessible because it was still, these things were like apps or someone put Nicolas Cage's face on something. But now all of a sudden it's becoming accessible. Even the new Photoshop neural filters allow me to change my face, my age, my facial expressions in a sliding scale. I feel like this year, all this stuff's becoming more accessible, which is different.
Oh, it's becoming very accessible, right? We just saw that, report about Hunter Biden was created, the person who supposedly put it out there, I can't remember his name, like Bob Aspen or something, was a deepfake, right? And his face was a, AI generated face and put on a report. So we're seeing it in the heart of American politics. So you're going to see lots of deepfakes, right? So we're there, right? The technology for that is becoming more accessible. It will only become more accessible. The technology for identifying it is hard. But then let's go one step closer, like one step further. So, okay, so now we can impersonate somebody's look. Can we impersonate their voice? Yeah, we can actually impersonate their voice, right? And we're seeing the first attacks where, Russians call up Ukrainians, record their voices, and then use those voices and, manufacture other words out of them and use those for hacking attacks, right? So you can get your face, you can get their voice. Okay, now what about their writing style, right? Okay, well now we can probably clone their writing style. Like eventually you can both as an attack vector, you can imagine getting a pretty good clone of an individual. And then you can also imagine as like an efficiency vector, right? We have digital assistants, right? X.AI, and they don't work that well right now, but probably isn't too long until Gmail can analyze all the emails I've ever gotten and, not just anticipate finishing this clause, which is what they can do now, but finish the sentence and finish the paragraph and then write the whole damn thing for me. And it's dystopic and scary, but my God, if my email inbox was empty when we finished the Zoom because my little personal assistant has been like crushing it on responding to emails, that'd be great.
Clement noted, yes, there's virtual influencers. There's several actually. Lil Michaela, who now has 2.8 million followers. She comes from 2016. There's now virtual influencer agencies. There's now stock photo sites with hundreds of thousands of photos that are all just virtual people. But actually, if we want to talk about the most disturbing thing, I need some audience yes or no. Should I go really disturbing and dystopic? Yes or no? Put it in the comment and we'll take a look. Yes?
Yes.
Yes, yes, yes. Yes.
Who are these people?
I know, right? I'm like, no. Oh, look at this. We've got some. Virginia says no. Well, okay, this is a Wired. Nick Thompson writes no. That's you. It's a Wired article you shared on Facebook. Should I mention it or no?
Bring it, yes.
Okay, so this is the scariest thing, but in the Telegram app in the UK, what happened is that a bot started making it so that deepfakes would remove the clothing of people from their normal photos. 600,000 people went through it, which actually means all of us who have an Instagram account or something public could have fake compromising photos revealed to us. And for 600,000, that happened already.
Yeah.
But a bot could do it and then send you pictures of you revealed and say, send me $10 to this blockchain account or else, so what happens then? Because that seems like that's happening. What's next on that? How do we protect ourselves? What do we do?
Well, I don't think there's anything you can do about that. I mean, that is on the social media platforms. It's on the tech firms.
Someone just said it happened to her. So someone got that. They got an extortion email of themselves.
And it was a fake photo or a real photo?
It'd be a real photo made fake through deep porn.
Right. So, I mean, I don't think there's anything you can do at an individual level to prevent somebody, besides like making sure there are no photographs of you available on the internet, which is not practical. So, I mean, you can reduce your virtual footprints. You can, try to have as few images as possible online. But really, if somebody builds a machine to virtually remove your clothes, it's not actually you. So limit your footprint, and then if it's not you, I guess don't pay the ransom.
I've noticed though, there's a generational divide, because I think that the next gen, they just don't believe that something's real right away. So there's like, for your kids, it's probably like, no, they'd be like, oh no, that's a fake.
Right. Yeah, no, I mean, and there are virtues and costs to that, like not believing anything you see online and immediately suspecting that everything is fake. And there are virtues to that because it means that you're less likely to be manipulated by fake news. If you look at who shares fake news in the United States, at least, it's all old people, right? Because young people are much more cynical, and the Pope didn't actually endorse Donald Trump. Like, that's a load of garbage, right? And old people are like, oh, that's on the internet, must be true. So there are advantages and disadvantages to the distrust of the kids.
Now, Nick, we've motored through a lot of the questions that we talked about in advance. We've done a bunch of the audience ones. I was wondering if we can use some time to go through 4 scenarios and kind of a rapid fire. What would Nick's take be in 4 different scenarios of the future? It's all improvisation. You haven't seen this, but it's similar to what we've been talking about. Does that sound cool?
Yeah.
Okay, so we are going to do, in sort of classical scenario analysis theory, what would happen is that you'd break your world down into the biggest uncertainties that might impact you or your company. So in day 3 of Future Fest, this is what we're doing with people. And the scenarios we're going to do as a simulation would be, I alluded to this before, but COVID either stays or it goes, and our world attitude is either changed or it's back to living normal. So there's 4 scenarios then. If COVID goes away and we're back to living our normal life, it's like high five land. We are back. We're going to conferences, events. It's like it never happened. A different world could be COVID goes away through a vaccine or not, but we're still changed. We're sort of like afraid of certain things. We spend a year living, locked up, and it's like, I'll call it altered comfort. The other world could be, you know what, we give up on it. The economy is important. We can't sustain through subsidies this forever. We're going to live with it forever. So now it's a bad flu. It's a terrible flu. You can die from it. It's bad, but we are back to normal because we have no option. Or life abnormal. COVID stays, everything has changed. So those are the 4 worlds. I'd love to get your thoughts on what they're like, and you can pick a world and we'll dive right into it. Which one do you want to dive into first?
I'm going lower right. I'm going for altered comfort.
Lower right, altered comfort. Here we go. Nick Thompson's take on it.
Oh, you want me to explain what it's like?
What do you think it'd be like? How would we deal with it?
So I feel like what'll happen, I do think altered comfort is there. I think because COVID won't go entirely away, right? It will still be a risk. We won't sort of remove it entirely. There will still be breakouts, but it will be down the line once there's a vaccine and once we have a more responsible response. I think the risk of infection will go down to 100th of what it is today right now in New York. But I do think that there will certainly be masks in public places. I think that I'll probably never ride an airplane without a mask on again. I think that we will start to take precautions about public transportation, right? We'll take the high risk vectors and we won't take those risks again. I think we'll have more money diverted into science to try to prevent the next such disaster. I think there are probably 100 things I do right now to reduce my risk of COVID. Probably 50 of them will stay.
Now, what's interesting, we're getting a bunch more comments because this is the sort of topic that everyone's talking about. But part of scenario theory is that regardless of what you think the outcome will be, you talk about the other theories as if they're the reality, and that allows you to be more prepared for whatever happens. So if you're cool with it, we'll just keep on motoring through to the other scenarios. Sounds good?
Bring it.
All right, so the next one is that COVID stays with us forever, but we move on. We can't handle it. Done. We move on. You got the flu? It's terrible. See you at work in 2 weeks.
Yeah, so this is a scenario, I mean, this is like North Dakota, South Dakota in the United States right now, where something like, I think it's like 40% of everybody knows somebody who has COVID right now. I mean, it's a crazy, crazy outbreak, and yet still there's very low mask compliance. And so the argument here is, it's a little bit of a Darwinian one. It's like, well, only the weak will perish. The rest of us will get through it. We saw that sort of that attitude in Donald Trump, who sort of makes his survival of COVID a macho thing. And so in this world, you have a lot of people who are dying. Our treatment gets better, our hospitals get more prepared, we learn all kinds of things, lay them on their stomach, right? Give them remdesivir. The survival rate increases, but a lot of old people die, and it's a tough world to live in. And I actually, I don't know whether, I guess I have to say this scenario, right? So I guess in this scenario, I guess we also are going to baseball games and basketball games again, and we just live with the risk. I can't imagine being in that world, but you're right. Maybe we will be there. I'm still not going to the Barclays Center though until there's a
Okay, so then this is the world then in the COVID stays with us that's a little bit different, which is life abnormal, and it stays with us, but we do all those technologies we talked about that they're doing in China. We have every possible thing. We just start protecting ourselves. And what's this world like?
Yeah, so this world makes sense to me, right? I can imagine this world, right? This is a world where we all wear masks, where we all talk quietly, where public transportation is altered, where there's, new ventilation put into every building, where, and you're starting to see this in an interesting way, where if you're going to start a store, it's actually a competitive advantage to have windows that open and close, right? I feel much more comfortable going into stores that have the front doors open, right? And maybe that's irrational, but it suggests that they give a shit about ventilation. And it becomes a world in which staying safe from COVID becomes something you do, not just for virtue signaling, but actually for business, right? So if I'm starting a new company, I advertise it. I used to advertise it as, hey, I've got free snacks. Now I advertise it as, hey, I've got east-west ventilation on every floor, right? So you can imagine that, that happening.
Now let's bring it back to some positivity. Let's be encouraged. Yep. In our high five scenario, this is like SARS. We don't talk about SARS anymore. I know.
Yeah, you look at New Zealand, right? There are countries that are there, right? You look at New Zealand rugby matches, right? The stadiums are full, people are screaming, people are happy, right? You can imagine getting rid of this if you, even without a vaccine, right? If you get the R0 down, down below 1 for an extended period of time, eventually it goes to 0. You have a certain amount of herd immunity because so many people caught it, or maybe the vaccine mutates and becomes weaker, right? And then in that case, yippee, like it's all back to where we were in February. And I'm like on a plane every weekend, and I'd be coming up to Toronto tomorrow to come visit.
And psychologically, how long does it take for us to get there? If we're all vaccinated, or enough of us are vaccinated in Q1, and the money's there, the budgets have sort of been put there. It's logistically not been done in history before at this scale. But if that happens and Q1 sort of has things solved, Q2, it's not really a relevant thing. How long until we snap into it?
I don't think that long. I think our behaviors can change. And I started noticing that, during the summer here in New York, you could really see the changes week by week as people became, less cautious, right? We went through that horror of March and April, and then by June, July, people are starting to play soccer. By August, they're, fully out and about. And of course that leads to the virus coming back. But if you were able to knock it out even further than we did, and if the rest of the country had also worked as diligently to knock it out, you can imagine a scenario where we're back in that upper right quadrant, which would be a beautiful place, Jeremy.
I have one note. My CMO caught me going too dystopic. She gave me a thumbs up on the switch to positivity because, so good point, Rose, thank you. But one thing that's interesting is that in everything that we've been caught up in, we have lost track of the fact that there's been a lot of huge wins this year. So, for example, in the eco space, this year solar became so much more inexpensive. We're now decades ahead of forecast. 73% of all new power installations have been solar. There's currently an Indiegogo for a kit that's between $700 and $2,000 that could make solar what you use to power your whole house, which is unreal. And we're starting to make waves between things like that and AI. There have been a lot of positive things going on in the background. What would you say are a few things that we've lost track of that are incredibly positive, but they just get lost in the filter bubble of your news?
Oh, I think that climate change is absolutely right. So, we did this special issue on climate change and how to solve it, and how to change the shipping industry, how geoengineering works. One of the best special issues you ever put together, Wired. And we, it was our April issue, right? So it came out March 20th, and no one read it, no one, and no one has talked about it, right? Because we just switched into COVID. But it was a extremely important distillation of where the world was going prior to March, right? The environmental consciousness was increasing to incredible degrees. You were seeing like sentiment among young people different than it had ever been before. You were seeing pressure on businesses in ways they'd never seen before. You've seen advances in solar. I took my house entirely solar in February, right? So the economics of it had started to shift in the favor of doing that. You started to see progress towards geoengineering, which will be an essential part of this. And we've kind of lost track of that since then. But once this is over, I think we'll snap back to caring a lot about that.
Awesome. Well, this has been a really nice treat to get to put you in the grill, put you in a couple game-like scenarios of Q&A. Any other thoughts that you have or words of wisdom that you'd like to tell people as we get ready for your keynote at Future Festival World Summit, which is free, November 10th? What else should we be excited about on that day?
Oh, well, I think I just, everybody in America, please go vote tomorrow. That's pretty important. And then please stay calm, whatever the outcome is, whether your candidate wins or loses, because protecting our democracy is the most important thing. So that's my last word on that. For November 10th, I am excited to be done with this election, and I'm always excited to talk about the future.
Excellent. All right, go vote, everybody. No matter what your candidate is, vote. It's really important, obviously. And I look forward to seeing you, along with Nick, on November 10th for Future Festival World Summit Virtual. Thank you so much for your time, Nick. Really appreciate it.
Awesome, and thanks to all you wonderful people who asked all those great questions and had all those great comments. See you next week.
Thank you so much.
Bye.